See, we all have our Hagar moment. That moment when we feel so empty that we are the dry desert. That moment when we're so weary of the battle that we fall to our knees with nothing left to offer. The moment where we feel unseen by people and by God. And maybe for you, it's not just a moment. Maybe for you, it's been this journey that you've been on. You see, my entire life, I've been indirectly told my entire life that my personality is wrong. That being an introvert is not right. It wasn't okay. I can remember in elementary school, I would always get good grades. But earlier on in years, you get there's all those letters, there's P's and E's and NA's and NP's and IP's and whatever they all are. But I remember my grades would be good. But beside that, it would always say, needs to participate more. Needs to speak up in class. Needs to raise hand to give answers more. Needs to be more involved. And it wasn't that I didn't want to. It wasn't that I didn't want to be a part of the class. It was that I found it hard. It was difficult. I didn't know how to do it. It was terrifying. The thought of speaking in front of people created this fear and anxiety in me that I didn't know how to work through. I remember going into middle school. Middle school is just different, right? It's just a different age. There's a lot happening all at one time in middle school. But you start to begin to find yourself a little bit. Excuse me, sorry, Nate. It had to happen. It was rattling. But you start to develop this core group of friends that you feel like will be with you to the end, right? At least that was what it was for me. And so after a certain amount of time, I felt like I got comfortable with these people. I can share things. I could do this. I could be open. And so I would share things that I only intended for them to know. And wouldn't you know it, everybody found out. So my natural response in that moment was, I shouldn't be open. I shouldn't share things. I'll just keep that to myself because I can't trust people. A few years later in high school, I can remember roaming the school hallways by myself, or sitting in the library at lunch if my best friend wasn't available, because at that point I had gotten to a place where I was like, I can have one friend. One friend that I'll trust. It'll take some time to get there, and it did. It took 3 years. But I can trust her. But it's high school. She got a boyfriend. The thing that people do at lunchtime is you walk around the halls with your friends or your significant other, and I had one friend, no significant other, so I was alone. And I would sit in the library and pretend that I had schoolwork to do, pretend that I had stuff I needed to get done, because I had deemed everybody else to be untrustworthy. And when grief hit, that's something. When I had to work through watching a family member decide that life on earth was no longer worth living, and then their failed suicide attempt. Already feeling like, I can't trust people. I can't open up, I can't express, I can't let people in, because every time I do that, hurt comes. Every time I do that, I feel like I get 10 steps back after I've taken 10 forward. It was easier to retreat, easier to suppress my feelings. You see, I'm an introvert at heart, and being open is hard. Being vulnerable is painful to even think about, let alone doing it. And in my experience, sometimes it was crushing. It was devastating. And then God calls me into ministry, exposing the very weakness that I tried to ignore. I've worked incredibly hard to get to the point that I'm at today, where the thought of being vulnerable with people doesn't make me want to run to the deepest, darkest corner of the earth until you all forget who I am and forget what I said. But it took me having a Hagar moment, feeling dry and empty and alone and lost in the desert. It took me falling on my knees in my moment of grief, of wondering why I would never be good enough for people just as I was, why I was constantly told that I was the one that needed to change, that I needed to be more outgoing, forget how I believed I was created to be. For 30 years, I fought the concept that I would never be good enough until I fit into the mold of what others wanted and expected of me. That I'd never be a good leader. That I'd never be a good pastor unless I pushed myself beyond what I knew I could mentally and emotionally handle, no matter how much it crushed me. Once I got there, at least I'd have something to show for it, right? And then one day, someone dared to open their view just a little bit. And from that, they equipped me with this book that has helped me to understand, not change, but to understand what makes me work, to understand the personality that God blessed me with, to no longer look at it as a curse or as something that I'd never be able to get past, as something that would always hold me back, but to look at it as a blessing, to look at it as the thing that makes me me. But church, I had to stop running. I ran away from my personality for 30 years thinking if I just ignore it, if I don't address it, if I don't acknowledge it, then it doesn't exist. I had to stop running.